Welcome. This deep dive is about one of those, well, really persistent and frustrating problems we see in a lot of modern economies,
The housing crisis.
the housing crisis, and specifically that chronic struggle to get enough homes built, especially where people need them
Well,
most.
they're trying to look beyond the headlines today.
Yes, we really are. We're going to try and get past that very understandable, very emotional reaction. The one that immediately blames developers for being, greedy or for hoarding land.
It's a necessary pivot to make, I think, because if the conversation just starts and ends with, they're the villain, you don't actually learn anything. You short-circuit the analysis.
Right.
So we've gathered a whole stack of sources, everything from housing policy white papers to developer financial statements. And the mission today is to really analyze the systemic risks and rewards that force these decisions about land use and construction.
Exactly. Because from the outside, when you see prices soaring and a site with full planning permission just sits there dormant for 5 years, it looks indefensible.
It does.
But if building and selling homes is how these companies make their profit, then the real question has to be, why would they ever rationally choose not to build?
And we have to assume they're rational actors. They're operating inside a specific economic cage. Their choice to hit pause suggests that doing nothing has somehow become the most sensible, the least risky financial move available to them.
So it's not about good or bad people.
No, it's about finding the root cause. What has changed in the environment around them to make inaction safer than action?
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with the core mechanism, because I think it's often misunderstood.
I agree.
Most large-scale developers, they only get paid, truly paid, when the whole development is complete, the homes are sold, and they've moved that capital onto the next site.
They are not paid for the years they might spend fighting through paperwork or laying half-finished pipes in the ground.
Not at all.
The whole model relies entirely on the successful delivery of that final product, which means the entire process, from buying the land to handing over the keys, is basically a high-stakes, unsecured loan they take out on themselves.
A loan that's only repaid years down the line.
Exactly. And when you understand that, you start to see why any little wobble in the external factors can cause them to just slam on the brakes instantly.
So let's get specific on those wobbles. We've identified 4 major external factors that can make pausing seem, well, like a perfectly rational decision. What makes the environment so uncertain?
The first two are the basics: revenue and cost. When they drop their original plans, they assume a certain sales price, that's their revenue, and they assume a set budget for construction.
Okay.
But then maybe finance tightens up. Say interest rates jump 200 basis points on their development loan. Suddenly, the cost of just holding that dormant capital balloons.
And at the same time, their building costs could be rising.
And not just rising, but rising faster than the sales price they think they can get.
And the sources give us some really painful detail on that cost factor. It's not just general inflation, is it? It's very specific input costs.
Precisely. We aren't talking about a gentle 2% rise here.
Mm.
The sources we looked at cite Q3 data, where certain vital building materials like specialized insulation or steel beams jumped 15 to 20%
In a single year.
in a single fiscal year. So if your projected profit margin on a 50-unit site was, say, 10%, and your material costs suddenly jump by 8%, that project instantly becomes a loss leader.
Wow.
You're financially better off waiting a year, just hoping costs stabilize, even if that means zero revenue coming in right now.
That's a powerful illustration. Now, the third factor often involves time, and as they say, time is money in development. You mentioned planning drag.
Right. They might anticipate a project will take a year to get through the final hurdles, but it turns into 3.
And that ties right back to the finance point.
It does. Every extra month, that project just sits there, waiting for some planning condition to be cleared. That interest clock is ticking away, eroding any profit they hope to make. The longer it drags on, the more capital is stuck.
So if they push forward into that kind of volatility where costs are rising faster than revenue,
They are actively maximizing their risk of a major financial loss.
but if they wait, they minimize their active losses and they're holding an asset, the land itself, that has historically, tended to go up in value.
It completely shifts the risk calculus. It creates a situation where the penalty for delaying is often far, far less severe than the penalty for proceeding with a shaky financial model.
And that, of course, brings us to the very thorny issue of land banking.
It is charged language for sure.
And the conventional definition, deliberately holding back land to drip feed supply, That absolutely happens. Our sources confirm this is a real strategy. It's a classic speculation.
It is. Speculation is buying something cheap, hoping scarcity or future demand will drive up the value, and then you sell high. It's a
Oh.
business gamble.
And we should be clear, it doesn't always pay off.
No, not at all. Not every speculative land purchase succeeds. The land could be downzoned, that promised new train station might never materialize, and sometimes developers do end up holding on to expensive assets that just aren't generating any income.
But the sources also caution us not to treat all holding of land as, malicious, scarcity-driven speculation.
Yes, there's a really crucial nuance here that we have to spend some time on.
The difference between that kind of speculation and legitimate practical delays.
Absolutely, because when a developer gets planning permission for, say, 500 homes, that land is still just a field. Or maybe it's a derelict industrial site.
It's not ready to build on.
Not even close.
Yeah.
That land often still requires massive, expensive infrastructure work that the local authority might not be handling or funding. We're talking about new main roads, huge drainage systems, power substations, utility hookups.
And these logistics aren't trivial things. It's not like just connecting a few pipes.
Far from it. One source we read mentioned a development that was held up for 18 months. 18 months.
Just for one thing.
Solely because the local water authority, which of course operates on its own timeline, had to schedule the installation of a new mainline sewage pump. And that pump required a specific, bespoke piece of equipment that was manufactured internationally.
So it was a genuine logistical choke point.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it froze millions of dollars in capital.
And then beyond the sheer logistics, you have those planning conditions, the legal requirements that have to be met before a single shovel can hit the dirt.
Exactly. And these aren't just details, they are legally binding steps.
Mm.
For an informed audience, this is where you see how complicated the system gets. A developer might have full outline permission, but they can't start work until they satisfy a dozen reserved matters or conditions.
And those could be anything.
Anything. It might be a mandated archaeological dig that takes 6 months, or providing proof they've secured a 30-year bond to maintain a new park, or completing a biodiversity net gain assessment that requires a full year of seasonal environmental surveys.
So when we see that land sitting dormant, the question is the developer banking it to maximize profit? Or are they literally just waiting for an environmental consultant's final report that's stuck in a bureaucratic backlog?
It changes the analysis from a question of character, are they good or bad, to a question of logistics and bureaucracy. Sometimes holding land isn't a choice for maximum profit, it's just the reality of waiting for all the practical and legal pieces to line up.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Once we acknowledge both types of waiting, the strategic speculation and the logistical necessity, we are forced back to this central economic problem. Why does holding land so often feel safer, even smarter, than actually building on it? What signals is the system actually rewarding?
If we just look at the financial signals and strip out the emotion, the calculation often favors waiting. Building carries immense financial risk.
As we've established.
Prices could fall, supply chain costs could shoot up, and if the market turns, sales could stall, leaving them holding finished homes they can't move. The second you commit that capital and start digging, you expose yourself to all of that volatility.
And there's another layer of complexity there, isn't there? It influences what gets built, not just if it gets built.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
The market signals clearly favor construction at the top end. Building high-value private homes is usually far more profitable per square foot than building for the lower end, like genuinely affordable or social housing.
Even if that's what the community desperately needs.
Even then, the system encourages waiting until demand pushes prices even higher to maximize the return on the most lucrative segment of the market.
But hold on, I have to challenge that a bit. The idea that holding land is low risk. Surely inflation eats away at any profit. And doesn't the developer risk losing the planning permission entirely? Doesn't that risk undermine the argument that waiting is always safe?
That's a critical point, and it's exactly why we need to focus on systemic incentives, not just abstract finance. Yes, inflation erodes static profit, but the historic data shows that land, which is a finite asset, tends to appreciate at a rate that often outpaces core inflation.
Okay.
But more importantly, the system rarely punishes the delay effectively.
What do you mean by unpunished delay?
Well, planning permissions often have very long sunset clauses, maybe 5 or even 10 years, which means the developer has no immediate pressure to start. And crucially, there is often very little financial consequence for just sitting on that permitted land.
The holding costs are low.
Very low. Local property taxes or holding costs on undeveloped land are usually minimal compared to the potential for that asset to appreciate in value.
So if building means high, volatile risk, and holding means low, manageable risk with a high chance of long-term appreciation, why would we be surprised when a rational actor responds to that?
We shouldn't be.
Hmm.
This isn't about some universal failure of character in the development industry. It's the incentives doing their job exactly as the current system is designed. And this raises an important question.
Which is?
The logical outcome of this specific trade-off is delay. Right now, doing nothing is cheap and predictable, while doing something is highly risky. If your goal is to get more homes built, that trade-off is fundamentally the wrong way around.
So the goal shifts entirely. We move from finding a villain to designing a solution that structurally reverses that trade-off.
Yes.
How do we stop doing nothing from being the easiest, safest choice?
We have to change what feels sensible. The immediate emotional reaction, the threat, the shouting of build or else, it just doesn't work. It might satisfy a sense of outrage, but it actually increases uncertainty in the market.
Which is the last thing you want.
It's the exact opposite of what you need to spur major long-term capital investment.
So instead of confrontation, the approach needs to be more surgical, more focused on shifting the underlying economic dynamics to favor action. We need predictability.
Precisely. The goal should be to make building feel like the safer option again. And that requires two things. First, reducing the economic uncertainty around construction, maybe through standardized permitting or fixed timelines for utility hookups.
And second,
Second, you have to actively increase the cost of inaction. Delay needs to stop being quietly rewarded.
okay, let's move beyond high-level phrases like surgical design. What are some of the specific policy tools mentioned in the sources that could actually increase the cost of doing nothing?
Well, several mechanisms are discussed globally. One involves using existing tax structures. For instance, you could increase the local non-residential property tax or council tax, specifically on land that has been granted full planning permission but remains undeveloped after a certain predictable periods, say 3 years.
So that turns a passive asset into an active liability.
It turns passive holding into an increasing liability, creating genuine time pressure. The asset appreciation is no longer automatic.
Right. What else?
Another tool, which is used in some places, involves much stricter enforcement of those sunset clauses on planning permissions. If you make it very costly and bureaucratically exhausting to renew a permission that's been allowed to lapse, it forces the developer to use it while it's live.
It creates a ticking clock.
It creates a ticking clock that financializes all those logistical delays we talked about earlier.
That seems like a major shift, but the sources also caution that we can't move too quickly here.
Caution is absolutely necessary. If you just introduce policy shocks, sudden, punitive measures, you don't necessarily get homes built faster. You risk projects stalling immediately because confidence drains out of the entire sector.
Banks pull their financing.
Banks pull financing, and suddenly everyone sits on their hands waiting to see what the next rule change will be. And ultimately, it's ordinary people who take the hit through even greater housing scarcity. Any shift has to be gradual, predictable, and frankly, kind of boring in its execution.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, then we are fundamentally moving away from these moral lectures and focusing on system design.
Yes. The problem isn't that every developer is a mustache-twirling villain. It's that the rules of the game they are playing actively encourage the most conservative, the slowest path forward.
And a final goal here is quiet, but it's profound. Can we design a system where proceeding with construction feels like the sensible, low-stress default choice? If we can create that environment where the economics actually favor the builder over the waiter, we don't need crackdowns, we just need good policy design.
So what does this all mean? We started with that very understandable frustration over greedy developers and land being banked. We've analyzed the complex incentives driving that behavior, how high risk for building, combined with low, unpunished risk for holding land, creates a perfectly rational choice for delay.
Mm-hmm.
And we've concluded that the path forward really requires this surgical, predictable system designed targeting tax structures, planning windows, rather than just relying on emotional outrage. And that leads us to the final, provocative thought for you to consider. We've established that the system is broken not because we lack tools, but because the existing incentives are just misaligned. The question then becomes, if the solution is predictable, well-designed policy, what enforcement or financial tools, whether it's planning fees, property tax, infrastructure contributions, do we already have in place right now that we are currently barely using or maybe just using too gently? That could immediately start reversing that risk equation.